And so the recording and the PowerPoint presentation will be available to you. We'll circulate it after the session. So thank you for joining us this morning, and welcome to Leveraging Existing Expertise to Build Career Resiliency in the Evolving Energy Ecosystem. I think a lot of you who have joined us in the past know that a lot of our work focuses on, looking at opportunities for the oil and gas worker who is looking for work or looking for a career transition to leverage that existing skill into the broader evolving energy ecosystem. I think what you're going to find is a little bit different with today's presentation is our research showing that showing that things are moving along, even within the oil and gas industry. We're seeing an increased hiring within the oil and gas industry, but there still are elements in which the industry is working differently, and that the whole concept of lifelong learning is there in spades, and we need to kind of continually upskill and upgrade knowledge in order to not only get a job, but remain resilient within a career within the energy ecosystem. Just before I get any further, need to acknowledge that this presentation webinar is free thanks to funding through the Alberta government. So, pardon me, I won't go through this, just to say that, really what we want to do is share with you some insights, information, and tools that help you to be more proactive and focused on figuring out what you need to not only find that best path to employment or to career transition, but also career resiliency. Once you get a job, being able to stay in that job or within that sector and not be facing, some of the similar kinds of issues that you might be facing today in terms of making that transition. We're hoping that the information we share with you today provides you some sense of control in terms of looking at making this change. And so not only from a career perspective, but also in terms of increasing your overall mental wellness, which is so important when you're in this mode of making changes and trying to build, something new for yourself. I'm going to just, quickly go through sort of webinar protocols that are, probably second nature to everybody now. As I mentioned, this meeting will be recorded and we will circulate the slides soon after the session. We're going to do a few polls, and the polls are really for us to gather a little bit more information about who's here, what your interests are, and that will help us inform sort of where we take the session, but also gives us some insights into ongoing work and what might be helpful in terms of future webinars. We're going to ask that you remain on mute. We have set aside some time for some Q&A, and we ask that you use the chat function to ask your questions or share reactions, or you could direct message any of the hosts if you prefer to send your questions anonymously. On that note, we're going to start with our first poll and learn a little bit about who's in the room with us today. And so we have two polls. You can answer, go from one question to the next. The first is really talking about which category best describes your usual occupation, and then some thoughts about what you feel your current barriers are to employment. There we go. So yes, they just follow one after the other. If you don't see yourself in the first question around usual occupation, or even, if you don't feel that some of the barriers we've identified are those that you experience, please use chat and tell us a little bit more about either of those two factors. Maybe we can just give people like 30 more seconds. Okay, and maybe let's end the poll and see a little bit about who's in the room. So a kind of a broad range of occupations, I guess, given, the fact that we're kind of a Calgary-based organization and a lot of who we attract to our webinars are Calgary-based. It's not surprising to see that a lot of the occupations that are here with us today are sort of in those business support or engineering and geoscience professionals. And, as well as, we certainly know drilling and oil field operators have been impacted. And so this is good. We'll certainly try and, relate the information to these occupations. And it's always good to see, career and employment practitioners in our sessions, because we work very closely with career and employment practitioners. We appreciate that they are trying to stay up to date on this information and career transferability as well. And so if anybody isn't working with the career practitioners, there's some really good resources available here in Calgary through some of the programs. And I urge you to check it out. I think, these are some interesting sort of thoughts in terms of what some of the barriers are. And I think what we're really, we're not going to deal with ageism so much specifically, although some of the, tools and resources that we're going to use, we will share are going to be useful that way. I'll also refer you to a recent webinar that we did specifically looking at that employer bias against oil and gas workers and ageism. And let's maybe talk, in terms of what we're going to share today, give you some tools to look at some of the employment opportunities that are out there a little bit differently, and how to, and that might be motivating and also build some confidence in terms of your overall job search. We're not going to go deep into the training, but what we will do is tell you about our upcoming training panel, which is happening next Thursday. And that's really where we're going to get into what kind of training is available, and that will kind of support a lot of what we're saying here in terms of how to build a resilient career. Okay, so to provide a little bit of context, just wanted to, share with you what we follow in terms of trying to understand where the industry is going and what does that mean in terms of the opportunities for job seekers coming into the labor market with with oil and gas experience in particular. And so this is just a collage of recent headlines, but they really are indicators of what's driving energy transition and really causing the oil and gas industry to do business differently and shift their business models. And so our thought, our belief is that the oil and gas industry isn't going away. And I would say, recent geopolitical factors and, that's driving up demand and prices is an indicator of that. And we're seeing more jobs within the oil and gas industry. But there certainly is, the industry certainly is doing things differently and relying on a broader ecosystem to fulfill their priorities. So let's talk a little bit about what those priority activities are, because again, this gives you insights into how the industry is evolving and where some of the specific focuses are in terms of activities and skills that can be required. And those really are those sub-bullet points under the bigger headings. So to quickly run through this, I think despite, current prices being at highs for both oil and gas, industry is still looking for ways to be cost competitive and profitable. And so we don't see that going away. I think the industry realizes that, it's cyclical in nature. The highs may be a little bit higher. The lows are definitely lower. And to be sustainable, industry needs to find that, kind of magic balance between increasing production and driving value within their business operations and processes. Decarbonization and commitments to net zero is driving the need for implementing practices, technologies that will make the oil and gas industry more carbon competitive and reduce the overall footprint. And there's the bullet points list a lot of the technologies, clean tech and carbon tech that we're seeing companies developing and deploying. The focus on ESG is significant and a growing area of priority for the oil and gas industry. And it's needed to certainly attract investors, but they're realizing that it's also really important to attract talent. There's, a growing understanding that the environmental, social, and governance factors that they're measured against from an investment perspective is also what's going to create a more sustainable industry. And sustainable means longer lasting. And people want to know that the industry is going to be around for a while in order to, be attracted to it. But they also want to know that there is work being done to decarbonize and reduce that environmental footprint. And so paying attention to what's happening on that ESG front. I think the other thing around ESG and attracting investors that's, a little bit unique here in Canada is that some of those or an emerging investor group are Indigenous groups. And so working with Indigenous communities and Indigenous businesses is a skill set that we're seeing growing, certainly within the oil and gas industry, but within the broader energy ecosystem as well. I think have learned that can't rely on the US as a single customer And so, we're certainly seeing all those efforts related to diversifying markets, not only internationally, which often means pipelines to tidewater somewhere, but also looking at where are the domestic markets for Canada's oil and gas industry. So, that's petrochemicals, it's, that transition from coal-fired power to natural gas-fired power. Blue hydrogen is, hydrogen in and of itself is gaining more and more prominence, and blue hydrogen in particular relies on natural gas for feedstock. So market diversification. The other thing is if we look at how the industry is evolving, Canada has a lot of expertise, whether it be hydrogen, because we're, one of the world's top producers already, or CCUS technologies. Again, Canada has some world-class expertise there. So, have heard from the industry and that broader ecosystem that by building our expertise here in Canada offers an opportunity to export not only our commodity, but our expertise. Digitization and automation and everything to do with Industry 4.0 is, key, because it is a pathway to both cost competitiveness and decarbonization. And then as a business is going to do things differently, they're going to have different supply chains, different partnerships. And so we're seeing that happening in terms of the overall expansion of supply chains within the oil and gas industry. And so you may be asking, why talk about the oil and gas industry if we're also talking about, perhaps job search outside of the oil and gas industry, or transitioning your career to the outside of the oil and gas industry? It's because the evolving energy industry, including oil and gas, and including the oil and gas industry that is focused on maybe a different set of priority activities, is going to rely on different sectors. And so what this does is means that, and what this slide focuses on, is simply those sectors that we believe the oil and gas industry is going to rely on in order to meet its priority activities. And it also gives insights into industries you may want to target your market research in, to really understand whether or not these are career transferability opportunities or even employment opportunities. And the reason why, and we refer to, the sectors that appear on the right-hand side of the screen, is we refer to these sectors as adjacent sectors. We also think that they are sort of the greatest transferability opportunities because they are providing services to the oil and gas industry. They may appreciate the value you bring with that domain oil and gas knowledge more than some other sectors. And that certainly is what we are, our research shows, is coming in with an understanding about how the oil and gas industry works, what their priorities are, what are the problems they need to solve, and some of those relationships that you bring to the table are of value to those sectors that are providing services or products to the oil and gas industry. The other thing that we're finding, our research shows, in terms of a transitioning oil and gas industry, or just a transitioning energy system in general, is that it really relies on, pardon me, an innovative ecosystem that brings together a number of different groups. And so whether that be, small and medium-sized businesses that really are sort of focused on developing some of those clean tech and carbon tech solutions, whether they be digital or otherwise, industry itself has to be at the table. But there also is a lot of academic and research institutions, working to help evolve our energy system. Government is also playing a key role, not only in terms of investing, but also establishing those appropriate regulatory and policy frameworks to, encourage investment and deployment in transitioning our energy system. And then, of course, there's investors themselves, which could be anything from, an investors group to, some of the accelerators, digital, clean tech, carbon tech accelerators that are out there that are providing investment opportunity to the evolving energy ecosystem. And so I think 2 points I want to make around this is that, one, those that are involved in this sort of ecosystem and supporting the innovation of energy are also employers. So this just might give you, again, insights beyond some of the sectors you might want to target, but some of the types of organizations you could target your job search and or career transition plan towards. The other thing that, is coming through in spades is that collaboration is key to evolving our energy system. And collaboration to the point that competitors, and you might be able to look back on that sort of headlines, collage of headlines, companies that used to be competitors in the marketplace are actually collaborating because there simply is this understanding of, if we're going to accelerate technologies, accelerate development of sectors that are going to create a more sustainable energy system here in Canada, no single company or organization can do it on its own. So what it means, though, is not only do you have to think about the technical skills that might be required and assess the upgrading or enhanced knowledge you might need from a technical perspective, it also means understanding how work is being done and what does that mean from a soft skills perspective. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. The next few slides simply are slides that you can take a look at and help to sort of target or see where, based on your usual occupation or the usual skill sets that you bring to the table, where you might fit in this evolving energy ecosystem. This particular slide really sort of focuses on those skills and occupations that are going to be required to decarbonize the fossil fuel industry. The next slide, couple of slides, focus on those occupations that are part of renewable energy. This one looks at wind and solar, and the next slide focuses on geothermal. And then finally, also looking at that whole digitization and automation within the industry. And here's a listing of in-demand digital jobs that we're seeing, in our research, which also includes, looking at labor market reports. And this, sort of the new digital jobs, that's just an indication of how much the industry is going to be relying on these occupations. And so, we went through these fast, But what I can tell you is that every oil and gas job appears somewhere else in that broader energy ecosystem. It may require upskilling. In fact, I'm going to tell you it probably does require some level of upskilling or enhancing your knowledge, just because the industries are changing and evolving quickly. And the role you left, 6 months ago, a year ago, may look very different, not only in the oil and gas industry, but also in the broader evolving energy ecosystem. And again, we're gonna share with you some additional thoughts around that, as well as encourage you to, pop into the webinar next Thursday. Finally, I'm going to wrap up just with this slide on some other resources that will help you to do a deeper dive on those occupations that we showed in those previous slides, and dives more into some of the specific skill sets that might be required across the broader energy ecosystem. And on that note, I'm going to change it over, transition it over to Cheryl.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm just going to leave it on this slide for a second, just to give you a heads up that what I am going through is all available for you in one way or another in each of these resources. Pat and I developed careertransitions.ca, and we developed the content for careers in energy. That's more of a website than is the former. And then the CRIN project, the Clean Tech project, was also work that we did. So these are really helpful resources. So I am shifting gears. Pat gave us a really, really good overview of what's changing in the environment and how it's affecting occupations through that innovation ecosystem. My job is to show you how to take what you have, what you know, what you want, and apply it to a sector where you are transferable, and to understand how your occupation is transferable, and that any gaps that you identify are opportunities to address them through adjustments in expectations or training. So what I'm going to, and again, using the resources that we just highlighted. So light on note taking here, everybody, and heavy on trying to understand the process and the methodology, because this is being developed over years and has been tried and tested. So starting out with sector to sector transferability, we have identified 3 criteria: technical transferability, nature of work transferability, and value proposition transferability. So the technical transferability is, everybody knows what this means. It's how well does your experience and your education and your certifications and what you work with, equipment, business processes, and so on, how well does that qualify you for a new job? But you cannot simply just rely on that. The other things that are important are what your expectations and needs are for the nature of work, the work environment, because this indicates how well you will fit in with the work environment. And employers are looking for fit, and they're also looking for the extent to which the value proposition they can offer you meets your needs. So the value proposition indicates that you're going to stay or stick. An employer, as was mentioned earlier, can be hesitant to hire that oil and gas worker, primarily because not so much the technical transferability, but what they see as issues with fit and the value proposition that means that you'll stay. So think through these elements of technical nature of work and value proposition, and we're going to dive deeper into each of them right now. So we're going to start out with technical transferability. And I'll go through the definitions and then basically some questions for you to think about that help you to tease out your technical transferability. And I'll do this using the format of a resource called Starting With You. That is a workbook that is downloadable from Careers in Energy and careertransitions.ca, and that helps you to walk through a process of identifying, what do I have, what do I want, and what am I willing to do to get there? So you'll see that format through these next few slides. So technical transferability is, again, just what you think it is. But each of us comes to the table with a different type of technical expertise. Some people are so good at analyzing, working with information and data, managing it, storing it, whereas other people are more adept at working with individuals, communicating with teams, working with groups, and others are really hands-on, working with materials, designs, buildings, troubleshooting equipment, and so on. So this is probably the easy part, but a really important starting point. And as Pat mentioned earlier, in order to be transferable, start with thinking about what you have and leveraging that experience in oil and gas into those adjacent sectors. So these next two slides indicate oil and gas expertise, those columns on the left, and there's two slides that do it, of different areas of expertise, and indicating where those skills and knowledge areas are required in the evolving energy ecosystem. So we've gone into renewable energy, clean tech, petrochemicals, and LNG. And I'll just go into the next slide so you can see some of the other skills. We haven't listed high-tech and oil and gas and industrial construction and maintenance, but you'll find those on those websites that I mentioned. It was merely lack of space on these slides. So the key message here is leverage what you have and then look for those skill requirements in these adjacent sectors, and it may require understanding the language and perspective and sometimes processes of these additional sectors. So that's technical transferability. I'm going to shift gears to nature of work transferability, which is about how well you fit within a work environment in a different sector. And the first assumption that you should make is the work environment in oil and gas is likely different from the work environment in many other sectors. So what are we talking about here? So we're talking about work arrangements, we're talking about where you work in an office or outdoors or indoors, the size of company, which can be really influential on the work environment. And then probably less obvious but very pervasive is the work culture. So that has to do with the structure, the risk tolerance, how people interact, and so on. So it's really important for you to think about what kind of place you like to work and what type of place you want to and can work, and communicating that in your resume, your covering letter, and in interviews. And not everybody will be comfortable in all types of work environments. And in fact, you should really think about deal breakers and dig deeper into those types of work environments, such as remote work or office work, for example, where it is a deal breaker for you, and simply don't seek out those opportunities. So with respect to nature of work, we've really learned quite a bit from our work in clean tech. And what we found here is that soft skills, or the ability to use your accumulated knowledge and your different work experiences that goes beyond technical skills, is very critical and extremely important to employers with respect to fitting in with a work environment, but also showing that you are adaptable and resilient to the many changes that are going on in the environment and the different types of players that are involved. The master servant, and some of you will recognize that language that has been used in the old days in oil and gas, that master servant relationship between the oil and gas owners and the contractors just will not cut it in the innovation work environment. And through our work with clean tech and understanding the nuances of innovation and collaboration, we understand that skills such as business acumen are extremely important, and that goes beyond business skills to commercialization and deployment and business development skills, which are not as common in oil and gas. Building relationships with different organizations and different types of sectors and industries around those expanded supply chains. And I'd just like to point out here that this is as important as your technical skills, and that many of you who are experienced will have developed these skills through your accumulated knowledge and experience, but in your past business environment, it may not have been valued and emphasized as much as technical skills. So I'm suggesting to you here that you flip a little bit and start to think about these universal skills that you have and looking for ways to sell them and emphasize them. So going into the last sector to sector transferability criteria, which is value proposition transferability. This again has to do with whether or not an offer from an employer meets your needs in terms of what you want and what will keep you there. So in the back of the mind of the employer is, oh my gosh, when this person gets a job offer in oil and gas, what is going to happen? Are they going to leave for a bigger salary? So if you are going to leave for a bigger salary, if oil and gas offers you one, you've got two options. Don't apply for these jobs because you won't get them, or find a way to convince the employer that there's more to you and your needs than a bigger salary, or actually, actually get there, own that and be genuine about it. So again, they're very hesitant. Employers are hesitant about this, and then it is up to you to position it. So what will make you stick in a new company or a new sector? It is going to have to do with what is the minimum salary that you're willing and able to take. That is a reality that you need to address, and you can research salaries that other sectors offer and be realistic about that. And if you cannot simply live, survive, meet your financial obligations with the salaries that are being offered, that's a reality to address. Other aspects of value proposition are role level, location of work, the career development opportunities that are provided by a company that may meet your career goals. And what is becoming increasingly important and mentioned is the values that you hold and how the values of a company are aligned with what you believe are important. So, and again, as with the workplace, the work environment, there will be deal breakers here, and expect the employer to try to get at what your deal breakers are, because those are the factors that, if you accept a job, will ultimately mean that you might want to leave. So you're better off to understand what those are and approach opportunities that do not tweak your deal breakers. At the bottom of this slide, we have some resources to help you to investigate competitive salaries in other sectors. So what I'd like to do now is summarize sector to sector transferability and show you how it looks when we look at transitions from oil and gas to those sectors in the adjacent energy ecosystem. And those are the sectors that we've mentioned already. So this slide summarizes the transferability from oil and gas to petrochemical, right down to renewable solar energy, and the transferability that we've assessed through our research, including consulting with employers, based on those 3 sector to sector criteria, rated as either high, medium, or low in transferability. And as you can see, it's broken down for each of them. And you may wonder why. So for example, for petrochemicals, we have both high to low transferability. And that has to do with that life cycle or value chain that Pat highlighted when she showed you the jobs in solar and wind. So as you know, petrochemical manufacturing has a value chain that starts out with project development and goes into operations. So your transferability may be high, medium, or low in terms of the technical skills, depending on what you bring based on your value chain experience and the value chain of the sector. So the other thing I'd like to add here is that individual skills and experience will change the transferability. And so it's nuanced based on what you bring to the table. In many cases, it will require you to do some upskilling to qualify for a transition to these other sectors. And again, to think really hard about the changes in the work environment and the value proposition, and to investigate those ahead of time. Shifting to occupational transferability. So this brings us to the transferability of your occupation into the same or a similar occupation in those adjacent sectors, and investigates what you are willing to do and, quite frankly, might have to do to qualify. And again, we've broken this down into definitions or criteria, but these are really pathway definitions for occupation to occupation transferability. So the transferability from, say, an engineering occupation to an engineering occupation in geothermal or clean tech may be direct, or it may just require you to just do just a little bit of prep and research to qualify. And that's because the core qualifications, the technical knowledge, the work environment, the regulatory environment is essentially the same in clean tech, for example, as is the case in oil and gas. And there's a high likelihood that you're going to qualify and that you'll be retained in the sector because it's a good fit or a match for you. If a sector occupational transferability is a refocus, then that means that you are likely going to require some upskilling and upgrading, not to the extent of a degree, but more of a micro-credential, a short course, which requires some investment of time and effort on your part, but not as much as a reboot. And a reboot means that you are an electrical engineer and you want to be a software engineer. It is very likely you're going to have to go back at the very least for another degree or a diploma to add on to that electrical engineering degree. So this gets us into what you're willing to do. And I will say we're finding more and more, if you assume that you absolutely at a minimum need to refocus to do some upskilling and upgrading, that is the safest bet. And that a direct transition is more difficult. And of course, a reboot is something that not all of us are willing to do. So again, what you'll see in starting with you are the questions. And if you've responded, we'll look at refocus, that you're willing to relocate potentially, or take short-term training of less than a year, or maybe do unpaid work to get some experience, take a reduction in salary, or even a lower level position, this suggests that you are going to refocus, and that you should focus your efforts, what you're willing to do, on those things in that, where those check marks are. So again, careertransitions.ca goes through this in extensive detail, and it also gives you a really cool table of over 70 occupations in oil and gas and those sectors in the evolving energy ecosystem, and it rates the transferability of each of those 70 plus occupations as direct, refocus, reboot into each of those adjacent sectors. So I would urge you to look at careertransitions.ca or careers in energy, because we've taken that information in careers in energy and put it into more search functions, drop-down menus where you can search for your occupation and the sector you're interested in, and it will tell you about the transferability for your particular occupation, and will go further to tell you what are the things that you need to do to qualify for it. So this requires a little bit more work. As I mentioned when we started this, my purpose was to focus on the approach or the methodology to show you how to do it, so that you can take it away and hopefully take a different approach to your own preparedness and research. What I'd like to go into now is kind of leveraging what Pat talked about in terms of understanding what's going on in the broader environment to do your own market research. And really what we're trying to say is, you know what, you should do what we're doing every day, because conducting market research and knowing what is going on and needed by those adjacent sectors is a differentiating factor for you in your job search, and will bring you closer to understanding the needs of those sectors and the value that you bring to those sectors and the language those sectors use. So we're not going to leave you without resources on market research, because we think it is so extremely important. Firstly, I'm going to tell you how to do it, what to focus on, and then we'll show you how with some tips and resources. So in doing your market research, just as we've demonstrated, you need to learn about the industry or the sector, the employment opportunities and the qualifications, and be able to use the sector's terminology rather than the terminology that you're used to in your resume, covering letter, interactions with employers, and networking, if you will. Secondly, again, just reiterating what I've just gone through, you need to understand how to effectively assess what it takes to transition, going beyond technical skills, own and pursue the upskilling that you need, and show that you understand the differences between the nature of work in oil and gas and the sector that you're pursuing and the value proposition that they offer. And then lastly, monitor those leading indicators of job growth. Job boards postings are lagging indicators of jobs, so you should be monitoring those leading indicators of job growth, because they'll tell you about the availability and timing, even the location of those jobs. And that and you can do that through looking at spending announcements, project announcements, understanding the diverse supply chains, who's being awarded contracts. I actually think regulations are one of the more important things to monitor, because regulations will be the thin edge of the wedge. The regulations will be the announcements, the drivers, the government push that companies need to address. And they will drive innovation, they'll drive projects, and they'll drive investments. So there's going to be a huge alignment between regulations and project announcements and investments. And again, incentive programs, recovery programs, such as we heard yesterday from the Alberta government, will follow those regulations. So we've said it's important to do this. How you should do this are as follows. You should take a look at, again, spending announcements and the supply chain and who's involved in the supply chain, strategies and regulations, incentive and recovery programs, and the industry life cycle that you're interested in moving to, and evaluate that relative to your life cycle experience in oil and gas. So highlight a couple of things: strategies and regulations. The emissions reduction plan was announced at the end of March here. That is a plan to reduce our emissions by 40 to 45% by 2030. That is driving a whole whack of regulations, and two of them are going to come out this spring. The oil and gas emissions cap and the clean fuel regulation will be finalized. And then there are federal and provincial strategies on CCUS and hydrogen. So in terms of resources for each of the sort of 4 leading indicators of jobs, we've listed them on the right. So everything from industry and professional associations, where you can join webinars and subscribe to newsletters, to research announcements and reports, to government publications, and lastly but not least, job boards, remembering that these are lagging indicators of demand, but they sure do tell you a lot about work environment and value proposition in companies and sectors. Okay, so we've said a lot about the importance of a refocus or upskilling or training, and how that is kind of a going and assumption that we should all make in order to get a new job, if that's your priority to transition to another sector, or if you're already working, to just continue to be resilient in our careers. So, this is really a new area that we're focusing on in our the content of our webinars, and I'm simply going to introduce it here. This provides sort of a link or a segue into what Avery is going to talk about. But I also want to again reinforce why it's important and to let you know about what we have coming up. So it's no surprise to you, even if you've just heard it in this webinar, that the evolving energy ecosystem has meant that there are new training needs, skill requirements that are emerging, and that in order to be resilient, you have to find out what those are, add those skills to your current education and knowledge to meet the requirements of the emerging sector. Saying that is easy. Finding out what that training is, as some of you mentioned in the survey, is a little bit more difficult. But what we found is that there is a real emphasis and an acceptability on the part of employers of shorter, more comprehensive programs that allow you to have applied hands-on learning opportunities rather than new degrees. So 2 years ago, Pat and I would have heard a lot more people talking about rebooting. I'm going to go back and get a second degree or a third degree. And now we're understanding that may not be necessary, or in fact, to your advantage, in that that can be less applied and hands-on. And what is fantastic is that the learning system, as well as government supports, are responding to the evolving needs of employers and supporting job seekers to access and get the training they need. So Alberta announced a program yesterday called Alberta at Work, which is significant funding to work with employers and provide supports on retraining. The details on how that will unfold are in the weeds right now, but watch for it, because there's going to be funds available to support you and funds for employers to support them in hiring people. And you should be aware of both, because not all employers will be aware of these programs. And then learning institutions are providing a myriad of courses and programs to give you skills, additional certificates, or even credentials. And because we know this is challenging for job seekers and transitioners to understand what they need to do to achieve their employment and transition goals, we want to help you to address what you're willing to do. So you, of course, need to think about, but we're there to help you to identify the best way to do it. And we would encourage you to join our April 28th webinar, because we have 4 learning experts from different types of training organizations that will be on that panel, which will tell you, who will tell you about how their programs are going to be helpful in this environment and meet the needs that employers are placing on you, and how you can access that training. So we hope to see you there. But in the meantime, I'd like to move over to Avery Morris, who is going to help you to think about you and your readiness, and perhaps even your family's readiness, and your ability to pursue what you're willing to do for a resilient career, which includes training and upskilling. Avery.
Thank you so much for all of that wonderful information, Cheryl and Pat. As mentioned, my name is Avery Morris, and today I'm going to talk to you about managing mental wellness and resiliency as you navigate a career transition and really address the need for further training. A really quick overview, a little bit about me. I am a registered provisional psychologist at Calgary Career Counseling, as well as our partner practice, Synthesis Psychology. At Calgary Career Counseling, we focus on helping people make strategic and filling career decisions, and all of that is rooted in psychological approaches. So some of the work we do includes planning and pursuing a new career path, transitioning into a new job role, achieving career goals, managing workplace difficulties, and then some of the practical things like resume reviews, LinkedIn profile coaching, that kind of stuff. But really the emphasis is on helping you with career decisions while incorporating and attending to your mental and emotional well-being. So I want to get into the what and why, and I know Cheryl touched on this already a little bit, but I want to focus on 2 pieces that are actually quite interrelated. We're going to talk about acceptance and how that can help us move forward in our career, particularly as we consider additional training or education, because that can be sometimes a stumbling block for people. To be even able to consider what our next steps are, and in turn fully commit to the actions we need to take, we really have to reach a place of acceptance about our current circumstances. And then we're going to discuss the importance of training and how it can help us in our career, both in the short and long term. I'd also really like to mention that the topic of a career transition that's going to require additional education can bring up a lot of emotions for people. And it's really one of the first things I discuss with clients, even as early as our intake call or, our first touch base. And I do this because everyone has different circumstances that we want to be mindful of. But how we approach training and our perspective on it definitely has an impact on our career transition. So we want to address it really early on and really explore all the different factors that we need to evaluate. So I thought we would start things off with a polling question. And this is just a really quick way to check in and assess how you're currently feeling about the idea of retraining. And I know some of you are, employment practitioners, so you can answer based on maybe what you're seeing from clients. But I'd like everyone to consider, as they're, dealing or confronting with the possibility of further education or training, what kind of emotions are you experiencing? And there's a list here. By no means is it, inclusive of everything you could be going through, but these are ones that I commonly see with the clients. There's such a wide range. Feel free to pick more than one. And if, what you're seeing here doesn't resonate, you can always select other. Feel free to type in responses as well if you're comfortable. I really just want to get a sense of where everyone's at this point in time. So take a couple seconds and we'll come back and discuss the results. Okay, we will give people a couple more seconds as the last few responses roll in, and we'll close the poll in about maybe 10 seconds or so. All right, so let's take a look here. All right, now we're seeing, what I expected, a range in responses. We've got people that are feeling excited, some are hopeful, a lot, are maybe feeling insecure, overwhelmed, resigned. Like I said, it really runs the gamut in terms of how people are feeling. And, like I said, this is what I see in a lot of clients, and that's totally okay. Why we want to check in with this is because, of course, there are going to be things that we can do, right? There's strategies that are going to help. So let's head to the next slide and talk about what, in fact, can we do, particularly in the face of all of these emotions. Now, the first part, like I said, is about practicing acceptance, right? Because it really helps with action and follow through in the next phase of our career. It allows us to process our emotions and understands if the things that we're doing or feeling are in some way helping or hindering our wellness and our progress. So to go through the process of acceptance is in fact to practice resiliency. And if some of you have been in these webinars before, or if you're new, as a quick reminder, resiliency is really about responding to challenges and, how we react in the face of major changes. We also want to take some time to really think about where education fits in our life and in our career, because there's so many factors that have to be considered. So we're going to talk about some of those considerations as well as some practical tools to help you navigate the next steps. I also want to mention that, some of these things could be new for you. Some of them might not be, but really these webinars are a way for you to check in, hopefully take away some useful information and, tweak or reset your approach if needed. So let's talk about practicing acceptance. We know go through a career change is tough in and of it by itself, but when you also have to consider, or pursue additional training, it's really easy to get stuck on what was, or why we don't want to commit, or even what to do. So the first strategy is what I call grieve but not dwell. And I've talked about this in previous webinars as well, but it's really an important distinction to make in practicing acceptance. Grief after a loss, which absolutely includes a career change is valid. There can be a change in identity, commonly a sense of loss in time, energy, or education that we've had, all of which can leave us feeling, really unsure about ourselves and what our career looks like going forward, particularly because we know careers are such an important part of our lives. So it's important we acknowledge that there is a sense of loss there. But if we spend too much time focusing only on the things that we are or will be without, that's when we start to dwell. And that's really unhelpful and it's really unproductive. So, to prevent this, we want to have some sort of plan or things in place to help us move forward, and particularly with timelines or a real sense of what your next steps should be, which is why I imagine you are all here. I also want to stress that grief or sadness in and of itself does not have a timeline. So if you're still really feeling upset or unsure or overwhelmed, all of the emotions that we touched on in our poll, that's okay. Emotions are not a bad thing to experience. We just want to make sure that they're not impeding healthy decisions in your life and ultimately in your career. The next thing I want to talk about is what we call the next phase. We are living longer, healthier lives, which means people are working longer. So thinking about this transition as the next phase in your career with a lot of time to give an organization can be really helpful versus thinking that as, forced change or biding time until I can get out of here. So it's a real change in our perspective. And if we believe it's an exciting new chapter, we're going to be willing to invest in the changes that we maybe have to make, right? And again, this is about being resilient in the process because it's something to look forward to. This mentality is really helpful when we're considering taking on further training. Just as you experience at other times in career or in your career, you have to build on existing skills and develop new ones. It's a natural evolution and it's part of the career process. So even if it's new, it is not uncommon. The next thing is, defining yourself in new ways. I think that, this can be looked at in a couple of different ways. Careers are such a part of our lives, but they don't have to be the entirety of it. So this is an opportunity for us to recognize, connect, and develop other sides of ourselves. This often makes us feel better as it demonstrates and I think even reinforces that you are more than your work. So I encourage you to stay connected to your hobbies and rediscover how you like to spend your time outside of work. But this is also an opportunity to be open to new things in relation to your career. This is a way to understand what new parts of your work life you'd like to grow. Perhaps you have a skill set that you really want to become an expert in, or there are interests that you have and want to develop that previous roles didn't allow for. People have several and wide-ranging interests. So exploring this can really get us excited and motivated to make a change and also help us select what training that we might possibly want to pursue or need. And the last thing I want to talk about is the idea that training does not equal employment. And this is a sentiment I hear from almost every single client with the idea that if they're training, they want it to be for something, they want to get something out of it, often implying a job. I completely understand this desire, and I am not here to tell you that it's wrong to want that. But I do think we have to be careful in how we manage our expectations about education or training and really expand our definition of what success is in relation to those things. Training or education really helps us remove certain barriers to candidacy. It helps you set yourself up for future success. Unfortunately, it doesn't guarantee a job at the end, but realizing that is so important because it allows us to have realistic expectations, which is how we remain resilient and how we sustainably navigate this career transition. It can be really disappointing if we feel like, well, I'm putting something in and I'm not seeing results right away. Now, All this to say, there are things you can do in addition to the training that can even, further increase those chances of employment, networking, volunteering, certain programs with practicums, work experiences. I mean, I'm sure all of this will be discussed as well in the panel or the upcoming panel. So just be mindful of that in terms of our expectations. So overall, if we come to a place of understanding about where we are and where we hope to be, it puts us in a mindset that allows us to explore future opportunities, which I think takes us to some things that I think can be useful in considering when looking at training. So this is what I call assess and evaluate. This graphic here is actually part of some of the exercises I do with my clients at our practice, but I think it gives a really nice high-level overview of the factors we examine, regardless of where someone is in their life or their career. And we want to look at these factors through big picture of like, what are my career goals, but also how do these apply to, as Cheryl said, what am I willing to do in terms of training and education options? So if we kind of like go around the circle, we can ask different questions, right? What interests do you have, and do they connect with the current or future work that you want to do? Your personality can influence the tasks and environments you want to be in or where you thrive, both at work or in training, right? We know people learn in different ways. We know we want to apply those learnings in different manners. Certain skills or abilities, are we enhancing or are we learning new ones? Your values and beliefs, which again, Cheryl has discussed earlier, help us understand what you expect for a career and what you are willing to do to get there. And I want to be clear that whatever beliefs or values you hold about your career, it's okay because they're personal to you, right? There is no right or wrong in that. But we have to come to terms with the implications of what those values are and holding them and willing to accept how they may or may not impact outcomes. So I encourage everyone to consider these different factors because they inform so many of our decisions about what we want from our career, and in turn the actions we'll take to get there. And having a sense of these things are going to help us be really prepared when we are exploring training, because we're going to have a sense of, like I said, where we're at in our lives and our career and what we want to do. Now, there was one I skipped over, and that's what we call reality factors. And I'll go into detail on this on the next slide because it's something that I think is actually quite critical. So it is impossible to ignore that we each have a reality that makes certain career options and certain training or education impossible. And we always want to honor those realities. Unfortunately, though, many people let reality consume their focus, and they in turn maybe settle for careers that don't fulfill their interests, personality, values, all of the factors that we just discussed. But it is possible to find careers that are a really good fit and take into account your reality. If you base your decisions on the various aspects of yourself that we've been assessing and exploring. So what we'll actually have clients do is write out what they believe to be a reality factor and why it is important to their decision. And we do this because it sometimes helps clarify what is a barrier or what has an influence, and other times helps reveal that the things that they maybe thought were preventing them from making a decision aren't maybe as much of an issue as they sort of thought. So again, some examples here that are really common. A lot of individuals, for example, can't afford to return to school full time because maybe they have a family to support. They need both streams of income, full-time work. So that means certain education programs are not going to be available, and that impacts their transition, right? That's okay. There's lots of other options out there. Now, to give an example of one that I hear a lot is about in terms of type of learning. So on this chart here, I said require in-person learning, previously tried an online course and it was unsuccessful. So maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe you are someone who really thrives in certain environments where they're, in-person, hands-on. But sometimes, people, they're like, well, I couldn't possibly do an online course without ever being engaged in one. So it's really about, it's a new experience, and maybe they're feeling unsure, they're worried about the technology. All of those are really valid worries, but we want to question, is it actually a barrier? Because when we do so, we're actually expanding our options, right? We can also say, and this is a key part of resiliency, maybe not my favorite. I had a poor experience in the past, but guess what? There's things I can do differently this time around. I am a different person. I'm older. I'm more committed. Maybe I'm actually more interested in the training I'm taking. Again, so we want to use this process not to call into question your realities, but for you to think and challenge yourself. Is this a preference about my circumstances, or is this a non-negotiable? Because again, that's going to inform our decisions. And we don't want to prematurely assume something before we have researched our options, which is a perfect segue into my next slide, all about research. Cheryl and Pat have both highlighted, research as a tool. The fact that I'm mentioning here to you is, again, I think really stresses how vital it is. In our process at my practice, we divide research into what we call as passive and information interviews. So passive research is using, various sources, information interviews or speaking with people directly. Now, we want to use both kinds because they're going to give us lots of different information. So passive, we can look at program websites, association pages, job postings. These are all things that are going to show, okay, what's out there? Are, job postings asking for specific kinds of trainings? Am I seeing keywords continually? But then we can also talk to people, and we want to look at people outside and within the industry. We want to talk to admissions officers, program graduates. There's always valuable sources of information. I'm not saying these are always easy to necessarily get. It takes some legwork and some networking to do so, but can be really useful. Because what we do with this information is we evaluate it against all of the factors we've talked about, but particularly the reality factors, right? This is how we make an informed and balanced decision that incorporates both the practical realities of life and allows us to assess their emotions surrounding this change and whether or not we feel we're in a place to manage some of those things. So the last set of things I kind of want to talk about is getting comfortable with discomfort. This isn't an idea that I talk about with all my clients, and it's maybe their least favorite. The idea that they should be okay with being uncomfortable. Change is tough. In life, in a career, it doesn't matter. But, like I said, the idea of training can be quite overwhelming. Many of my clients, like I said, it's time, money, energy, education lost, or even the time, money, education they have to put in going forward. It can seem like a lot to take on. They're maybe even concerned about being in a learner position again, particularly if they're well into their career or a bit more established. And I want you to know that these fears are valid, and it's important to recognize what you can do might be different from what you want to do. So this is where it's important when we look at education and trainings, right? With your life, what do you need? Do you need online, part-time, in-person? How long are you willing to give? What do you have in terms of bandwidth and emotional capacity? Asynchronous schooling, right? Do you have the ability to be somewhere at a certain time every day, or do you need flexibility? So there's a lot of questions. I know I just threw 50 at you right there, but I want to stress that it's important to think about these, and it's also important to know that we don't always have the answers. It brings about a lot of uncertainty when we don't. So when I say get comfortable with discomfort, it's a mindset that gives us permission to acknowledge we might feel out of place or unsure, but that's okay. And knowing that there are no guarantees doesn't mean it's not worthwhile to try things, or that you aren't resilient and can't adapt and make changes when needed. I also like to stress that this is a process and it takes time. And I understand sometimes the pressing realities of needing employment. I'm not here to dismiss those, but sometimes things take a bit of time for them to click into place. And there's no set timeline other than the one you give yourself. So just because things aren't happening immediately doesn't mean they won't work, doesn't mean you aren't taking the right steps. So I really just want to validate that if you're doing what you can, then that's enough, and that the results will follow. Lastly, I just want to say that taking action is empowering, even if it does feel overwhelming and uncertain. We want to meet this change head on. We want to make empowered decisions along the way, and we want to do so in a way that is not reactive, but proactive and intentional. So sometimes we can make choices about our career and schooling based on the fear of, this pressing need to find work, or maybe where we are in our career and with our age, or uncertainty again about where the training will lead. But I really challenge you to be hopeful and to guide yourselves towards the careers that you want and where you want to go. So finally, just a set of resources that I want to outline. Some of these are really, really valuable, have free resources, further information, Alberta government website, Career Connection, ONET Online, all really great information about careers. And then the rest are if you need any support in terms of like your mental and emotional wellness specifically. And yeah, last thing, if you need further information or support, you can always visit us at calgarycareercounseling.com, call us, visit our website. And I just want to say thank you to everyone, and remember that the actions you take along the way and the way you take care of yourself are important. You are capable of making change and taking on new things. So look after yourselves and have faith that you will find something that fits for you in your career. So I'm going to turn it back over, and I think we're going to open it up to a Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Avery. And yes, we do have a few minutes. So if you have any questions or reactions, just, please feel free to pop them into the chat. I know there was a question and is it wrong to leave a job for a better salary? And I offered a couple of, sort of thoughts or notions in the chat, but I'll maybe give Cheryl an opportunity to see if she has anything she'd like to add to, to that response.
I'll just maybe leverage what Avery just said, and that's what you decide is right for you when it's right for you is totally within your hands. What I was suggesting is that maybe along the lines of that, employers having biases towards oil and gas, and the facts, the data that oil and gas is the highest paying sector in Canada, and that other two sectors may not pay as well. Now, they may pay the same. So for example, geothermal is within oil and gas, some of clean tech development is within oil and gas, but smaller startups, innovative companies in clean tech, they're in that ecosystem. They're really, even though they may be supporting clean technologies for oil and gas, they don't see themselves as being in oil and gas and probably cannot pay that. So I guess what I was trying to point out is keeping the same salary when you move to a job may not be realistic. And an employer knows that. And the question that's going to be in the back of their mind is something that you need to address. And that is convincing the employer that there's more to the value proposition than salary that will keep you there, whether you are being honest or not. What you do in the future, again, is what you do. It may impact your resume, your references, but it's up to you. It's for you to own. So is there anything wrong with leaving for a salary? Maybe it could affect your ability to be resilient and transition. And maybe the best thing that you can do. But the big thing is dealing with, again, using Avery's words, the realities that in order to get a job that supports you and your lifestyle, it may be at less of a salary. And the employer is going to know that and want to know how that will drive your future behavior. So that is up to you to think about and address. Yeah. That's my answer to it and why I positioned it the way I did.
Great, thank you. There aren't any additional questions unless somebody's madly typing into the chat. And so just want to leave you with this in terms of how to stay connected and up to date with us. And I guess, one of the things that sort of just, came to mind for me as, we went through this is, this need to, kind of lifelong learning, continuous sort of skill building and upgrading knowledge. It really is a necessity because of, what's happening in the broader economy, what's happening within the broader energy sector that you have been part of. And so it's, if at all possible, trying to not take it personally that you have to make this change, but more about, just this is where we're at in terms of how, jobs and employment and the economy is evolving. In fact, you know what? I mean, I was thinking about this because, prior to 2014, I was so focused on the oil and gas industry. And, it has taken a lot of work and is necessary for us, for Cheryl and I, to stay current, to, continually, doing research and upskilling and broadening our knowledge to understand what's happening in that broader energy ecosystem. The good news is that doesn't mean going back and doing another degree or even another diploma. There's lots of valuable learning opportunities that are out there that are reasonable investments from both the time and financial perspective. And that's really what the focus of our session on April 28th is going to be, is to share with you what some of those look like, and give you more information beyond sort of what we've shared and what Avery shared in terms of what might be a great fit or plan for you around, trying to upskill, to gain employment, but to also build a more resilient career in this ever-changing economy.
I'll just add again that we're definitely, as a registrant and an attendee to this webinar, we're definitely going to send you all the slides. The links will be there for you to look further into. As well, we'll send you Starting With You, which is that workbook. It's available online to download, but we'll send it to you to make it easy in case you'd like to do that, to assess your technical nature of work and value proposition transferability.
And on that note, I think that addressed the last question. And so thank you so much again for joining us. And we hope to see you again soon.
On the 28th in particular. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a great day.